She stood at the fence with her father's wheat going gold behind her, and she asked me the one question I'd spent 5 years running from. Can we build a life here? 4 words, said on the same ground I'd watched a bank auction out from under my own family. I'm a man who swore he'd never own a single acre again, never let anything grow that the world could reach in and take. And here was my neighbor, standing in the field we just fought like hell to save, asking me to plant my whole heart in the one place I was most afraid of. I helped her save her family farm that summer. I didn't count on her saving me right back. But to tell it right, I have to go back to the morning I pulled my combine into a dead man's wheat. My name's Grady Renner. I'm 43 years old, and I run a custom harvest outfit out of north central Montana. The Golden Triangle, they call it. Though there's not much gold in it most years, but the wheat itself. 3 combines, 2 grain carts, a crew of hands who follow the ripening north from Texas to the Canadian line every summer. I cut other people's wheat for a living. I own no land of my own, not 1 acre. And I'll tell you before I tell you anything else, that this was on purpose, and that I called it freedom for 5 years, right up until the summer I'm telling you about, when I found out what it really was. Because here's the part I don't advertise. 5 years back, I did own land. The Renner home place, that quarter section right across Ray's fence, the one my great-grandfather proved up in 1911 with a walking plow and a bad attitude. I owned it, and I got greedy and scared at the same time, which is the worst thing a farmer can be. I borrowed too much to buy more, betting the price would hold. And it didn't. And then we hailed out 2 years running, and the bank did what banks do. I stood on my own front steps and watched a man in a good hat auction my grandfather's ground off the tailgate of a trailer. My dad stood next to me the whole time and didn't say one word. And that winter his heart quit, and the doctors called it natural causes, and I have never once believed them. Rachel left in the middle of all of it. I don't blame her. You can't marry a crater. So I sold everything that didn't have a warranty, bought a custom rig, and I've spent 5 years cutting wheat I'll never own on ground that can never be taken from me, because it was never mine to begin with. You want to know how to make sure you never lose the farm again? Don't have one. I was real proud of that logic. I could have taught a seminar. And then Ray Hollis's daughter turned around in his wheat and looked at me, and something I'd bricked up good and solid 5 years back made a sound like a beam settling in an old house. You're the combine man, she said. Not a question. She had her father's straight look, and none of his softness worn on the outside. City-cut hair going every direction in the wind. Eyes that had been up all night doing math. Renner, he talked about you. Grady. I climbed down. I'm real sorry about Ray. I ran out of the sentence, the way you do. He was a good one. He was a stubborn one. She said it hard, but her jaw went funny on the last word. I'm Nell, his daughter, the one who left. She looked out across all that ripe wheat, like it was an unpaid bill, which, I'd find out, it was. I don't suppose you cut wheat on credit. That was how I met her, not running toward me across a lawn. Standing in her dead father's field at dawn, asking a stranger for a mercy she was too proud to call one. Here's what the numbers were, and Nell laid them out for me later at the Sundown Cafe over coffee that Junie kept refilling while pretending she wasn't listening, which is the only thing Junie does. Nell Hollis was 39 years old, and she saved failing companies for a living. Turnaround consultant out of Chicago, they'd fly her into some outfit that was 6 months from the grave, and she'd cut and restructure and negotiate and drag it back breathing. She was good at it. She was, by her own flat account, the best they had. And she'd flown home to bury her father and discovered she'd inherited the one thing on God's earth she couldn't fix with a spreadsheet. A standing crop. There's a note coming due, she said, turning her coffee cup and not drinking it. Operating loan. Dad borrowed against the crop like everybody does. Merle Dietz at the bank's been decent about it, but decent has a date on it. 11 days. She looked up. If I get the wheat in the bin and sold, the crop covers the note and there's daylight. If I don't get it in, if it hails, if it shells out, if it just sits there and rots because I can't find a crew in the middle of harvest, the bank takes the farm. My grandmother's farm. My great-grandmother's farm. Her voice never rose. That was the thing about Nell. The worse it got, the flatter she went. I've saved trucking companies. I've saved a hospital. I fly in and I fix the unfixable. That's the whole story of my life. And I cannot make wheat cut itself. No, I said, It's contrary that way. I can pay you when the crop sells, not before. I know that's not how it works. She met my eyes dead level. I'm asking you to carry me for 11 days on a handshake, Mr. Renner, and I know exactly what I'm worth as collateral, which is nothing. So, I should have said no. Every sane bone I had said no. This was the one field in the whole county I had no business being in. The ground right across the fence from my own grave. The exact disaster I'd spent 5 years driving north to outrun. Helping this sharp-cornered woman save her family farm was going to mean standing in the middle of everything I lost, every single day, for 11 days, and calling it work. Your dad already booked me, I heard myself say, first week of August. We shook on it. I stood up and put my hat on. I don't break a deal just because one man had the poor manners to die. Be ready at 5. And Nell, she looked up. Those gloves are 3 sizes too big. You'll tear your hands to ribbons. Bring a pair that fits. They fit fine, she said, in a voice that told me not to touch it. They were her father's gloves. Of course they didn't fit. That was the whole point of them. We cut wheat for 11 days. You have never worked until you've worked a wheat harvest against a bank clock. It's dark to dark and then some. The combine's a rolling roar. Dust so thick in the cab you taste last year in it. Chaff down your collar and in your teeth and stuck to the sweat on the back of your neck. And the heat comes up off that Montana ground in the afternoon, like the whole plains got a fever. Nell learned to run the grain cart. First day she was hopeless and furious about being hopeless. Third day she could pull alongside my combine at 8 miles an hour and take the grain on the go without spilling a bushel. And when she nailed it the first time, she let out a whoop over the radio that surprised her more than me, and I laughed for the first time in about a year and had to blame the dust. Her father's stock dog Pete wouldn't work for anybody after Ray died. Just laid in the shop shade grieving in that total way dogs do. Wouldn't come, wouldn't ride, wouldn't do the one thing he was born for. Broke Nell's heart worse than the bank did, I think. That dog wouldn't even look at her. Fourth evening, I figured out Ray had whistled him in a certain way. 2 low and 1 high. And I tried it out in the yard, not really expecting anything, and that old dog's head came up off his paws like a shot. Came running. Rode the cart with Nell every day after. She cried when it happened, and pretended it was the chaff, and I let her, because I'm a gentleman, and because I'd just done the same thing about her whoop. We didn't talk much. Cutting. Can't, over the noise. But there's a thing that happens when you work that close to somebody, that hard for that long. Grain cart 4 feet off your combine ladder 18 hours a day, meeting at the truck at midnight too tired to lie, where the not talking turns into its own language. I knew when she was running on empty by how she took the corners. She knew when my shoulder was seizing up. The one that catches when weather's coming, busted it in the rollover that ended everything. Another story. By the way, I favored the latter. We started leaving each other things. She'd have a cold Coke sweating on my combine step when I climbed down. I'd have the grain cart fueled before she got to it in the morning. Nobody said a word about any of it. That's how men like me say things. We fix your porch step. We fuel your cart. We whistle your dead father's dog home. The 5th day I drove 40 minutes to the co-op in Havre, and I bought her a pair of gloves. Good ones. Goatskin, sized small. The kind that actually fit a woman's hand instead of a dead man's. Left them on the seat of her truck without a note, because a note would have made it a thing. She came and found me at the fuel tank that evening, holding them like I'd handed her a snake. What are these? Gloves. You go through canvas in a week out here. Those'll last you. I have gloves. You have Ray's gloves. I kept my eyes on the fuel gauge because I'd learned that much about her. You don't corner Nell Hollis face on. Nell, I watched your dad wear those exact gloves for 9 years. I know what it is to keep a dead man's things because putting them down feels like burying him twice. The gauge ticked. My chest was doing something I didn't authorize. But you can't cut a harvest in gloves that don't fit. Your hands are already tore up. He'd have hollered at you about it. You know he would have. She stood there a long second. The wind came across the stubble and moved the whole field like water. You don't get to know things about me, she said. But it came out cracked down the middle, and then she turned and walked back to her truck fast, and I let her go. Because some things you have to set down in private. Next morning, she was on the cart in the goatskin gloves. Ray's gloves were folded on the dash of her truck where I could see them through the windshield. Not thrown out, set down. There's a difference, and it's the whole difference, and she'd found it overnight by herself. The night that broke it open, we were sitting on the tailgate of her truck at the edge of the last quarter. 11 o'clock, too wrung out to drive home yet. The wheat we hadn't cut yet stood black gold in the moonlight. Coyotes going somewhere off toward the breaks. And out of a silence she said, the last thing I said to him was that his way of life was a bad investment. I didn't say anything. I've learned the worst thing you can do when somebody finally opens the door is rush through it. He wanted me to come back and take over the farm. I was 26. I had offers in the city, real ones, and he couldn't understand why I'd want them, and I couldn't understand why he'd want me to bury myself out here, dying by inches the way— She stopped. The way I watched my mother do. And I told him. I said, Dad, this place is a bad investment, and you're too proud to sell, and I'm not going down with you. And I left. And I built exactly the life I said I would. And I flew home twice a year, and we talked about the weather, because it was the only thing left that didn't have a knife in it. She turned her cup. Empty. Been empty an hour, and now I'm out here in the dark, trying to save the exact thing I told him to let die. And he's not here to see me be wrong, and that's flat voice, bone flat. That's the part I can't fix. I came back to say I was sorry, and I got here 2 weeks too late, and there's no consultant on earth you can hire for that. And here's where the old me would have found a reason to go check the header height. Instead I said, I stood on my own front steps 5 years ago and watched a man auction off my grandfather's ground. Right there. I pointed across the fence line, black in the dark, to the quarter that used to be Renner. That one. That was mine. I lost it being greedy and scared, and my dad watched me lose it and didn't say one word, and he died that winter, and I've spent every day since telling myself that owning nothing means nothing can be taken. The stubble hissed in the wind. So when you tell me there's a kind of sorry that comes 2 weeks too late and can't be fixed, I want you to know you're sitting next to the world's leading expert. And I want you to know it's the loneliest thing a person can be an expert in, and you don't have to be one anymore if you don't want to be. That's the whole thing I've got. It's not much. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, so soft I nearly lost it under the wind. Then it's a mercy neither one of us is out here being an expert alone tonight. I have cut wheat in 9 states. I have watched the sun come up over more country than most men see in a lifetime. I have never heard anything as good as that sentence, said flat and tired and true, by a woman in goatskin gloves on the tailgate of her dead father's truck. If you've ever carried a sorry that came too late, and I think most of us are, if we're honest, carrying at least one, then you know there is nothing on this earth like somebody setting their own down right next to yours, so the two of them can just sit there in the dark and not be lonely for a while. We didn't touch. I want to be clear about that. Our hands were on the tailgate maybe 6 inches apart, and neither one of us moved them. And that 6 inches had more in it than a lot of things I've done with a lot less distance. Some nights the not crossing is the whole story. She looked at me once, and I looked at her, and the moon did what the moon does, and then a coyote laughed at both of us from the brakes and broke it, and we drove home in 2 trucks going the same direction. Day 10. The sky went wrong. If you've lived on the northern plains, you know the color. That green-black bruise stacking up in the west in the afternoon. Boiling, too still underneath. Hail sky, and we had 1/4 left to cut. The last 40. The difference between the farm living and dying, and the radar on Nell's phone showed a supercell coming out of the Sweetgrass Hills, aimed right down our throat. And the hail in a storm like that can flatten a ripe wheat field to bare dirt in 90 seconds. Everything we'd bled for 11 days, gone in a minute and a half of ice. How long do we have? She said, already climbing. Not enough. Get on the cart. We cut that field in the dark ahead of a hailstorm, and I will remember it till they put me down. 2 machines running full out under the yard lights, and then the lightning. The header eating wheat as fast as I dared push it. Nell pulling the grain off on the go, without a wasted second, because she'd learned. She'd really learned. And the storm coming on so you could smell the ice in the air. That cold metal smell that means run. Ordell, my old crew hand, sat in the semi with the truck lights on the field so we could see, hollering the radar countdown over the radio like a man calling a horse race, cheerful as a funeral. We finished the last pass with the first hailstones ticking off the cab glass. Big ones, marble size, the front edge of it. And I dumped the last of that wheat into Nell's cart, and she got it to the truck, and we got the trucks under the shed as the sky finally opened up and hammered that empty stubble field with ice for 20 minutes straight. Empty. It hammered an empty field. We'd got it. Every bushel. In the bin. Nell stood in the shed door watching the hail come down on the ground we'd just saved, and she started laughing. And then she wasn't. And I did the only thing that made sense, which was put my arm around her shoulders, and she turned into me and held on. 11 days and 2 weeks and 13 years of it. And I held on back and felt the whole shape of something I'd told myself I'd never hold again. The crop sold, the note got paid. Merle Dietz at the bank shook her hand and looked genuinely glad about it, which for a banker is practically weeping. Nell Hollis had done the impossible thing, flown home too late, and saved her father's farm anyway, which is exactly when it should have ended good. And here's where I nearly ruined all of it. Because 2 days later, a big operation out of Chester made her an offer. Clean, generous even. Buy the whole place. Equipment and ground, cash. Clear every last debt, put money in her pocket, and let her fly back to Chicago a free woman with the farm saved and sold and behind her. The smart play, the turnaround consultant play. Fix it, sell it, walk away whole. It was by every number she'd ever lived by, the correct answer. She asked me what I thought, and I stood on that ground I'd have given my right arm to grow up on, next to a woman I'd fallen for somewhere between the grain cart and the tailgate, and I got greedy and scared at the same time. The worst thing a man can be, and I said, "You should take it." She went still. Take it. It's the smart play. Clear money, no risk. You said it yourself. This life dies by inches. You've got a whole life in the city. No reason to chain yourself to a piece of dirt on the edge of nowhere. Every word was a brick going back in the wall, and I laid them fast so I wouldn't have to feel my hands doing it. Sell it and go home, Nell. That's what I'd do. Which was a lie, and she caught it mid-air, because catching lies in numbers was her whole profession. "No, it isn't," she said quietly. "You'd never sell this ground. You've spent 5 years driving to 8 other states, so you didn't have to stand next to the quarter you lost. You want ground so bad you can't look at it straight." She took a step toward me across the stubble. "You're not telling me to sell because it's smart. You're telling me to leave before I can, because a woman who leaves can't gut you the way this land already did. Same move you've made your whole life, Grady. Own nothing, want nothing, never stand on the front step again." Her voice didn't rise. It never did. "You dead man's handshake me for 11 days. You buy me gloves that fit, you whistle my father's dog home, and then the second it might cost you something, you tell me to sell it and run. Coward's a strong word, but I'd have to reach for a weak one. Nobody had ever laid me open that clean. Not Rachel, not my own father's silence." And then she turned and walked out to the fence. That same fence, the one Ray and I shook hands over. The one dividing the quarter I lost from the farm we'd just saved. And she put her gloved hands on the top wire and looked out across all of it, both places. Mine that was and hers that is, gone gold in the evening light. The whole rolling ocean of stubble and the mountains standing blue and far behind it. She didn't look at me. She looked across the fields, and she said, "I keep doing the math on why I should sell it, and every column comes out the same wrong answer." A long breath. "I don't want to fix this place. And flip it, Grady. For the first time in my life, I don't want to fly out. I want to stand right here." She finally turned her head, and her flat consultant's voice was gone, and what was under it had been under it the whole time. "So, I'm going to ask you the only question I've got the nerve for, and I need you to not give me the smart answer." The wind came across both fields at once. "Can we build a life here?" she said. "You and me, on this ground. Can we do that?" And there it was. The exact question that had put my dad in the ground and me on the road. Can we build a life here, on ground? Which is another way of saying, are you brave enough to want something the world can take away from you again? Because it can. That's the terrible truth nobody tells you. It can always take it. There's no version where you get to want the farm and the woman and the life and be safe. Wanting it is the risk. That's not a bug in it. That's the whole thing. I could feel 5 years of freedom. That was really just fear, standing behind me, waiting for me to choose it one more time. I walked out to the fence. I put my hands on the top wire next to hers. Close. The gap finally gone. I looked across the quarter I lost and the farm we saved, and I felt the whole ache of it. and for the first time in 5 years I didn't drive north away from it. I stood in it. Ray used to tell me, I said, you don't really own land anyhow. You just borrow it a while from the people coming after. My throat did something. I've been so scared of losing ground I forgot the whole point was never to keep it. It was to work it while you've got it, next to somebody worth working it with. I took her gloved hand off the wire and held it in both of mine, calluses and goatskin and all. Yes, I said. God help us both, Nell. Yes. Let's build a life here. She didn't cry, she just smiled. Her father's straight look with all the softness he kept on the inside, finally out where you could see it. And she said, good, because I already told Merle Dietz to tear up the Chester offer this morning. I just wanted to see if you'd be brave before I told you. And I laughed so hard I had to hold onto the fence, and Pete came running at Ray's old whistle, even though nobody whistled, and the sun went down over 2 fields that were about to become one. That was 3 years ago. We took the fence out the next spring, the one between my old quarter and her farm. I bought the Renner ground back an acre at a time from the Chester outfit that had bought it at my auction, which is a longer story with more swallowed pride in it than I've got room for, and now it's all one place, and we don't call it his or hers or mine. We call it ours, which is a word I'd forgotten how to say. Nell still does turnaround work, remote mostly, saves a dying company from the same kitchen table where her father did his failing math, and she's the only consultant in America who takes calls with wheat chaff in her hair. Her father's gloves hang on a nail in the shop, right where I can see them from the workbench. Not thrown out, not worn. Set down, the way you set down a thing you've stopped needing to prove you loved. Nell wears her own now. Goatskin, sized small, tore up honest from real work. Hers. So here's the only thing I know worth handing to you. If there's a piece of your own life you've been standing next to for years without looking it straight, some ground you lost, some sorry that came too late, some good thing you keep telling yourself to sell before it can cost you, I just ask you to consider walking out to the fence and looking at it head-on for once. It can be taken from you, that part's true, but so can every single thing worth having, and you don't get the having without the risk of the losing. That's not the fine print, that's the deal. And if any piece of this found you tonight, out on some dark road, standing at some sink, sitting on some tailgate carrying something you've never said out loud, I'd count it a real kindness if you'd tell me what corner of this country you're listening from and what ground you've been too scared to want. I read every one. Nell reads them over my shoulder and tells me which ones to answer, which is all of them. Go stand in your field, friend. I'll see you on the next one.